Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where late yesterday Wonder Woman 2 officially got a release date, and it brings up a lot of interesting questions. First, let's talk about the actual date, which is December 13th, lucky 13, 2019. Woo, that's a long way away. Now, a couple of you tweeted me and said, going up against Star Wars, has Warner Brothers lost its mind? Well, don't forget that Star Wars has now officially moved to Memorial Day, which I think means to some degree Disney has lost its mind. We'll see how Han Solo does when it starts that new release strategy. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if Star Wars ends up moving back to December. But once you get out of the space, can you return? We shall see. I think Star Wars for Christmas has worked out pretty darn well. But anyway, that year, Star Wars Episode 9 is supposed to come out for Memorial Day weekend. So Wonder Woman supposedly won't be competing with it. But, you know, Disney does have a date reserved right near it that they could always put Star Wars in. Because Star Wars can go wherever it wants. But maybe Wonder Woman can too. We'll see. But anyway, even beyond Star Wars, though, this is a tough date. I personally would think that Wonder Woman seems like a summer property to me, to be honest with you. Although I'm just so excited for the movie. And if Patty Jenkins returns and Chris Pine returns, I'm surprised these are still ifs, right? We'll talk about that too in just a second. But I think that if everything came back the way it was and it wasn't a period piece, but even if it was, I think that it's a pretty formidable opponent at any release date. But it's a very female skewing holiday season, 2019. Frozen 2 is slated to come out that Thanksgiving, and they've already begun working on it, so it should make its release date. And Frozen 2 is also a formidable opponent. I mean, I think that it's lost a little bit of its momentum, but you can see that everywhere you go, there's still Frozen toys everywhere, so they still must obviously be selling. There's still an audience, even if it's, let's just say it's in hibernation, right? I'm sure it'll come back to life for Frozen 2. Then also, Disney has a live-action fairy tale slated for that period. They have two release dates held, November 8th and also December 20th. So they could, you know, pick one for their they're both right now earmarked for live-action fairy tales, but I could totally see them saying, okay, 12/20 Star Wars, let's put 11/8 live-action fairy tale. And then Wicked is supposed to come out. Finally, that's going to get to the big screen, you know, the famous Broadway musical, also December 20th. And I would think that would also compete with Wonder Woman. But Wonder Woman, of course, is now an established property, so that gives a bit of an edge. The only real worry there, I think, would be Frozen 2. And maybe, depending on what live-action fairy tale it is and if Star Wars decides to get into the market. It's tough. I still think it should be a summer release. I think June worked really nicely for it, you know, the first weekend of June, and I would have repeated that. But that's not what we're doing. Also, don't forget, that's the same, you know, in mid-November, Bond 25 is going to come out. So this is a very competitive area. Now, why not announce if Patty Jenkins was returning? And why not announce if Chris Pine is definitely back? Gal Gadot obviously has to be back. She's Wonder Woman, and she signed for a multi-picture deal. And also, why not announce this at Comic-Con, right? They're like, you know what? Let's announce this like a few days later. I think what it sounds like to me is that the deal with Patty Jenkins must be taking longer to put together than they expected. She must be holding out for something, either or everything. More creative control, bigger paycheck, multi-picture deal. Maybe she wants a couple of pictures at Warner Brothers that aren't DC related. Maybe they're trying to tie that into her deal. But clearly Warner Brothers is like, I don't know, because the deal isn't signed. But I think they just wanted to grab this date. And, you know, I think to make Wonder Woman 2 official, especially because everybody predicted that it would be announced, a date would be announced at Comic-Con. And since they weren't able to do that, they probably were like, you know what, we don't want this to drag out or people to have any question about it. We want it to be set. So we'll see how long, and also maybe it's a negotiation tactic. Maybe they're like, hey, Patty, the clock's ticking. We picked a date. Are you coming on this train or not? We'll see what happens. I don't know. It's a tough situation. You know, look how long it took Frozen 2 to get together, you know? But I think it's a tricky release date. I wouldn't have picked it, but I think that Wonder Woman is in a pretty good position. So what do you think of the release date? What do you think that nobody's been announced for the project? And how do you think Wonder Woman will compete against those films that we discussed? Now, let's go over to the other side of the comic book movie market, which of course is Disney Marvel. And it looks like the Russo brothers' time there is coming to an end because they've just signed a huge deal with Fox. Yes, they're leaving Disney and going to Fox. If I were Disney, I have mixed feelings about it. I'd be like, I kind of made you famous. But I think as you see, as we discuss this story, Disney just couldn't have done the deal that the Russo brothers are getting at Fox. So I don't think there's probably any hard feelings. But, I think that's why you see that Disney and Marvel put all the attention on Feige, because the directors aren't going to be there forever, right? And also, who the heck knows what the Avengers is even going to look like once the Russo brothers are done with them after 2 Avengers movies. And they've done their time, right? They've made 4 movies for Marvel, and so far, it's gone pretty well. So anyway, what's the deal at Fox? It's for a huge production company, really expansive. You're going to see the Russo brothers contributing a lot of movies to Fox's slate. And Fox is like, oh boy! Although I would be careful, Fox. We'll talk about that in just a second. But as we've been discussing, a lot of the things we've been discussing on this show, as we'll see with the third story as well, are being demonstrated. So we've talked about recently that, the whole idea as a producer, or directors who also produce, like the Russo brothers, is to get yourself a home. So now the Russo brothers will call Fox home. They'll have an office on the Fox lot. Fox will pay for all their expenses to run an office. That means they'll also probably pay the salaries of a couple assistants, and cover all those expenses. And I'm sure as a result, therefore, they didn't mention first look deal, but I assume that's what it is. Fox will get first dibs on anything that the Russo brothers come up with. And so what they want to do is they want to direct and also produce. And through producing, they want to help quirky talent like themselves come up through the ranks to blockbusters, which does seem the direction of the industry right now. And it seems to be going quite well. Patty Jenkins had never directed a major movie before Wonder Woman. Neither had Taika Waititi, and Thor Ragnarok seems to be going very well. Same with John Watts. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does. Colin Trevorrow came from nowhere for Jurassic World, and that's going very well. And now J.A. Bayona is taking on Jurassic World 2. So it does seem to be a good idea, right? And so if someone says this is how I want to, structure my, my whole business, that would seem like a good thing. However, the first talent they've signed are 2 guys called the Daniels, who were behind the Swiss Army Man movie, which I thought was an incredibly poor taste. That was the Daniel Radcliffe film, you might recall, where Paul Dano found a dead body, Daniel Radcliffe, and proceeded to use it for a whole bunch of different, like a Swiss Army knife for a whole lot of different purposes. It was the kind of movie where you were like, Daniel Radcliffe continues to have poor taste in projects. And then the fact that the Russo brothers would hire those guys, maybe it'll be a pleasant surprise, but I'd be like, really? Of all the quirky people you could have picked, I feel like they might be the only ones that were too quirky. So we'll see how it turns out. But anyway, the reason Disney couldn't do this deal is that Disney doesn't have the bandwidth. As you can see, they release like a movie a month, and each one's a huge blockbuster, and they just don't have the space for what the Russo brothers want to do, both in terms of prolificness, but also the Russo brothers want to make apparently rated R films and prestige films, and Disney doesn't release rated R movies, and they also don't release prestige films, interestingly enough. Disney is squarely in the blockbuster business. They've tried to make a couple smaller movies like Queen of Katwe, which I thought was quite good, and also The Finest Hours with Chris Pine. That was a fabulous movie. Also had Casey Affleck in it, and Ben Foster. Really good film, actually. If you're looking for something to watch or stream, I highly recommend it. But none of those films did well. And also Disney just doesn't have the infrastructure in place to even get prestige films competitive in the awards season. So they don't have any interest in releasing R-rated films because they don't produce a lot of merchandise. And of course Disney is in a horizontal integration. Vertical is that you dominate one space. For those of you who don't know, horizontal is that you go across the board. And of course Disney wants properties that they can put in their Disney store, the Disney theme parks, on the Disney Channel, etc., which is working out great for them. So I think that Disney's model is great. It just doesn't fit with what the Russo brothers want to do. And Fox, of course, can certainly release R-rated films. They're doing quite well with it with Logan and Deadpool. And then, of course, they also have Fox Searchlight, which is incredibly successful in the awards marketplace. So I think this goes well for everyone. And then the final thing the Russo brothers said is they made a bold claim. They said, we want to play the long game. And we think the short game in Hollywood is what's creating the mediocrity in the market. That's their quote with films. So we want to have a writer's utopia, and that'll fix it. Now, I don't know. I don't know if I would have telegraphed that in advance. I think once I had a lot of hits, I'd be like, well, you know what I did? I don't think I would try and say, oh, look, this is what I'm going to do in advance, because I think, A, you could jinx yourself, and B, if you don't do it, that's a great headline. Everyone will be like, oh, the Russo brothers wanted to create utopia, and instead they only created hell. I mean, that just, it writes itself. So hopefully that won't be the headline that they generate, but they're very savvy. You know, they've talked about making their movies to combat internet jokes in particular, which I think is funny, and they've succeeded also there as well. But, you know, they didn't announce it in advance, right? That's something they said afterwards. So I think they should have been a little bit more careful, but I guess they were pitching their company at the time, and so they were going for the hard sell. And it worked. Fox said, I'll buy that. So we'll see what happens. Now, speaking of writers in Marvel, the third story of the day is quite interesting because it talks about the rise of screenwriter Shay Hatton, who has done exactly what I've been talking to you about recently. So I wanted to illustrate it, and also the fact that Lionsgate is apparently creating a John Wick cinematic universe. And it doesn't include Atomic Blonde, interestingly enough, even though it kind of does. All right, so anyway, because there's very similar movies. Shay Hatton went to, you guys ask me all the time about school, so here's one that worked out, Loyola Marymount School of Film and Television. So he went to that school. I believe it must be in Los Angeles, all right? So I was supposed to look it up before I filmed, I apologize. But anyway, he went to Loyola Marymount School of Film and Television, where he studied filmmaking and screenwriting. And while he was there, as I've been telling you, he got an internship, and he got it at Team Downey, Robert Downey Jr. and his wife, Susan Downey. He got a job at their production company. They don't really do that much these days. I mean, they were for a while, but they didn't go so well. So right now, I don't know what they're doing over there. But apparently they needed an intern. So he was an intern there, and while he was there, in his spare time, he wrote a script. Not the script that we're talking about that's sold here, but he wrote another script, and that script was good enough to get him on the blacklist, which we've discussed, and also to get him representation at CAA, one of the major talent agencies in the business. Then he had to continue to work at Team Downey, though, right? Because his screenwriting still wasn't paying the bills. So he got up to, after he graduated from Loyola, to writer's assistant, which meant that he did script notes on scripts that Robert Downey Jr. and his wife Susan Downey were considering making, and also coverage on submissions. That means that he would read a script that someone had submitted to Team Downey, almost always through an agent. That's the way it works. And then he would write up and say, it's usually a one-pager, and because Robert Downey Jr. and Susan Downey don't have time to read all these scripts. So what they have is they have writers' assistants who will write. Basically they'll give you a summary of what the script is about, and then also coverage includes that person's thoughts on its viability as a project overall and for this company. So that's what he was doing. And then on the weekends, he wrote a script called Ballerina, which seems pretty by the numbers to me, but I guess he understood the marketplace, and they're making all these assassin movies. So it's been described as La Femme Nikita by way of Tarantino or Matthew Vaughn, in a more pulpy way. And I think it's funny that Matthew Vaughn has become a reference in pitch meetings. I think that's hilarious. Because to be perfectly honest with you, I think that Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, the original John Wick directors who have now parted ways, and one's doing Atomic Blonde and one did John Wick 2, are a lot more, I think they have a lot more flair than Matthew Vaughn, to be honest with you. I like Matthew Vaughn a lot. I think he's got flair, but I think he has very mainstream flair. But maybe that's what they mean. This script is somewhere in the middle. But anyway, it's about a young female assassin who hunts down assassins who murder her family. I mean, who hasn't heard that story before, right? It reminds me actually a lot of Colombiana, which Zoe Saldana starred in a few years ago, and nobody saw. So, I don't know, and Ballerina reminds me of Black Widow. It just seems incredibly derivative. But I have to tell you, sometimes derivative sells because Hollywood's like, oh, I know that. That sounds familiar, so I feel more comfortable betting on it. And then I'd say, hey, Russo Brothers, that's what really leads to mediocrity in the business, mediocrity in the market, and why doesn't somebody fix that? Maybe the Russo Brothers will. But anyway, Lionsgate said, love it, I'm gonna buy it, and I'm sure Team Downey helped as well, through connections. It's it's a big business of who you know, and they're gonna make it part of a John Wick cinematic universe. I guess that Assassin's Club that John Wick belongs to. Why not follow other assassins in the club? And that's how you tie all the universes together. And maybe when this young female assassin checks in, John Wick's in the lobby or something, right? And they are apparently working on a third John Wick as well. I think that this, it seems weird announcing this just when Atomic Blonde comes out. Atomic Blonde, of course, is not in the same universe, but because it has the same, the director from the first film, and it's very similar to John Wick 2, it kind of seems like it's in the same universe. So I don't know. We'll see. This to me doesn't sound like a big success, but let's see how the project comes together, who they cast, who the director is. But right now, I think it seems a little weak. quite frankly. But we'll see. Now, instead of a viewer question today, I wanted to take a moment to talk about Ozark, because a number of you, viewers, so I guess it kind of qualifies, have been telling me to watch it. And so I finally did. Enough people were like, oh, you got to watch Ozark. And I don't know how long Netflix can rely on this mode of advertisement, right? Well, just let people talk about it. I wonder how successful it truly is. But anyway, I finally watched the first episode last night, and I was blown away. I was like, wow, this is so freaking good. I can't believe that Netflix didn't do more to promote this. Like, just recently, Christopher Nolan was like, Netflix is garbage, and their movies are garbage, and this isn't real film. And I was like, come on, Nolan, stop picking on Netflix. You know, they're producing some really interesting stuff over there. But then after seeing this show and realizing that Netflix did nothing to promote it, I was like, maybe Nolan's kind of right on calling out Netflix. So let's just talk about it. So Jason Bateman is the star of this. Laura Linney's in it as well. S.A. Morales as well, and he's really good. But anyway, I don't want to give too much away. It's really the Jason Bateman show, but it's a very different role for him. You know, we talked, I'm going to find a Logan Lucky review up today, and one of the things I talk about is that I don't think Channing Tatum is pushing himself enough, and I think Jason Bateman is with this project. So he's also not only starring, but he's also directing. He's directing, he directed this first episode that I watched. He did a fabulous job. He's directed most of the episodes for the first season, and he's also a producer. So anyway, the first episode, it's just watch it, because it's crazy how it unfolds. The story just very quickly spins out of control, but, you know, in a controlled way from the storytelling perspective, but for the characters, it's out of control. And as the layers peel back, you're like, this has got to be the heart of the story. There can't be something else. And then there's always another layer, or I guess another twist or turn, and it's really surprising, and it's done really well. By the way, I have to warn you, it's a very adult show, but it's really, really good. And so not only is Jason Bateman front and center, but Bill Dubuque is the co-creator and co-writer of the show, and he wrote The Accountant, which I love, many of you love. I'm helping you discover it. I'm going to hopefully help you discover this show. And also, of course, he was just hired to write the Nightwing script, although that hasn't been officially announced. But anyway, this show is just so good, at least the first episode was. And it was really, I kind of was upset, you know, considering how much Netflix has done to promote Glow, which I also really liked. I'm surprised they have done like absolutely nothing to promote something that has Jason Bateman in it. I mean, you would think that they would really push this. And you know, if they wanted to be an awards contender, which I think it could be, I don't know why they wouldn't push it harder. It's just very frustrating. And it must be frustrating for Bill Dubuque and Jason Bateman, who clearly worked so hard on this. So hopefully a lot of people will discover it. But I think Netflix, you know, I think they have so much money there. I don't see why they don't promote things more aggressively. It just makes no sense to me. I mean, they have amazing content, and they just don't do enough to make sure that people see it. I mean, I don't know. Nobody knows what their numbers are because they don't release them. So maybe nothing's wrong, but people should be talking about Ozark, and they're not. And so, I mean, and because they release all the episodes at once with binge watching, I don't know if anybody ever will talk about Ozark unless suddenly it gets a bunch of award nominations. But it just missed the awards cycle, because Emmy nominations, of course, just recently came out. So I don't know what's going to happen to Ozark. So it wasn't even positioned well for an awards standpoint. It's just really tough. But I really hope the show doesn't fall through the cracks, because it's really good. All right, thank you to everybody who recommended that I check it out. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below, I think, today's top 3 stories, Ozark and Netflix's strategy, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions, of course, that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.